Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
After 6 months of grunt work and coffee runs, my boss finally let me attend the National Marketing Convention. It was huge for someone like me. 3 days of networking, seminars, and industry showcases on the other coast. The company booked tickets for me and 2 senior colleagues. These guys had been in the business for decades and knew everyone. Walking through the airport, I felt like I was with celebrities. People kept stopping them for quick chats, business card exchanges, and promises to grab drinks later. I mostly just smiled and tried to look professional while carrying everyone's conference materials. The flight was packed with industry people since everyone was heading to the same event. The plane buzzed with conversation as marketing executives, creative directors, and agency owners filled the cabin. I clutched my boarding pass nervously, double-checking my seat assignment for the 100th time. This was my first business trip and I didn't want to mess anything up. When we finally boarded, my colleagues got caught up greeting more people in the aisle. I squeezed past them and made my way toward my assigned seat, ready to settle in for the 6-hour flight. That's when I saw her. A woman in her early 30s was sitting in my seat. She had on these massive sunglasses that covered half her face, even though we were inside the plane. Studio headphones sat over her ears, and she'd positioned herself like she was in some kind of meditation pose. Hands folded neatly in her lap, head tilted back against the headrest with her eyes closed. The whole setup screamed, "Don't bother me." The thing is, half the passengers were still boarding, shuffling down the aisle with their carry-ons. I cleared my throat softly and said, "Excuse me." Nothing, not even a twitch. I tried again, politely explaining that I thought she might be in my seat. Still nothing. I looked back at the growing line of people behind me, all trying to get to their seats. I felt the pressure building. I gently tapped her shoulder. No response. I tried again, a little firmer this time, then again. By the 6th tap, I was starting to feel ridiculous. Finally, she stirred and opened her eyes behind those oversized sunglasses. I told her I thought she was sitting in my seat. She pointed at her headphones and shrugged, holding up both hands like she couldn't hear me. The gesture was so exaggerated it looked like something out of a silent movie. I suggested she could try taking them off. She just stared at me blankly and shrugged again. The line behind me was getting longer, and I could feel people getting impatient. Some guy behind me sighed loudly. I pulled out my boarding pass and held it right in front of her face, pointing at the seat number printed clearly on it. She looked at it for a long moment. Then her mouth formed this perfectly round O shape, like she'd just discovered fire or something. But instead of getting up, she tucked her knees about half an inch to the side and gestured for me to squeeze past her into the middle seat. I stood there for a second, trying to process what was happening. She wanted me to crawl over her to get to the middle seat when this was clearly my assigned seat. I told her no, this was my seat, the aisle seat, and she needed to move to her actual seat. She tucked her knees in that same pathetic half inch again and kept gesturing for me to climb over her. The absurdity of it hit me. She was pretending not to understand basic seat assignments while blocking an entire line of passengers. I raised my voice and announced loudly that I wasn't the one getting in, she was. I said it loud enough that several people around us turned to look. She practically jumped out of the seat and scrambled toward the window without saying a word. The guy who'd been waiting behind me gave me a thumbs up as he passed and told me it was well handled. I settled into my actual seat, stored my bag, and tried to relax. The plane took off smoothly, and I was finally starting to enjoy my first business trip. About an hour into the flight, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was her again. She told me sweetly that she'd be open to switching seats with me if I wanted. Her tone was different now, like she was doing me some huge favor. I politely declined and told her I was good where I was. I gave her a polite smile, but inside, I was amazed at her nerve. She'd tried to steal my seat, got called out on it, and now she was acting like she was being generous. Another hour passed while I chatted with my colleagues across the aisle about the upcoming convention. They were giving me tips on which seminars to attend and who I should try to meet. That's when she tapped my shoulder again. She told me that her offer extended to my friends too. She said friends in this condescending way that made it clear she thought she was someone important. I just said sure with a little chuckle because I could see exactly what game she was playing. She was trying to establish some kind of industry hierarchy, like she was too important to sit in a middle seat. What she didn't know was that I'd already texted my colleagues about the whole seat incident right after it happened. They'd both looked her up on social media and professional networks, and neither of them had ever heard of her. The flight continued, and I honestly forgot about her for a while. I was reading through the convention schedule when she tapped me again. She asked if I'd talked to my friends about switching seats yet. I told her nope. Then she asked if I could please ask them. I said sure, but I didn't move. I just went back to reading my schedule. She waited for a few minutes, probably expecting me to actually get up and ask my colleagues. When I didn't, she retreated to her window seat. This exact same exchange happened 2 more times during that 6-hour flight. Each time she tapped my shoulder with this expectant look on her face. Each time I give her the same cheerful response and then go back to whatever I was doing. She'd ask if I'd asked them yet. I'd say no. She'd ask me to please ask them, and I'd say sure without moving an inch. By the third time, even my colleagues had noticed what was happening. One of them caught my eye and raised an eyebrow. I just shook my head slightly and smiled. They got it immediately. The woman never gave up though. Right before we started our descent, she made one final attempt. She tapped my shoulder again and asked the same question about whether I'd talked to my colleagues yet. I gave her the same answer I've been giving for hours. When we finally landed, she was one of the first people off the plane. She grabbed her bag from the overhead compartment and rushed past without making eye contact. I never saw her at the convention, and to this day, I've never come across her professionally. My life was pretty simple before all this started. I wake up around 7 a.m., make some coffee, cook myself a decent breakfast, then start my workday. Nothing fancy, but it worked for me. 2 months ago, everything changed when my sister showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and her kids in tow. She'd just gotten out of what she called the worst relationship of her life. From what little she told me, her ex was controlling and emotionally abusive. She looked completely drained when she asked if she could stay with me for a while until she got back on her feet. Of course, I said yes. She's my sister, and those kids needed a stable place to be. The first week went okay. My sister was clearly exhausted and spent most of her time sleeping or just sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. I figured she needed time to process everything she'd been through. Her 7-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter were good kids, just confused about the whole situation. I tried to keep things normal for them. That's when I noticed my sister's sleep schedule was completely messed up. She'd go to bed around 3 a.m. and not wake up until well past noon. Some days she didn't get up until 1 p.m. At first I thought it was just temporary. Maybe her body was catching up on all the sleep she lost during the stress of her bad relationship. But weeks went by and this wasn't changing. And here's the thing, those kids still needed to eat breakfast. So I started making extra whenever I cooked for myself. If I made scrambled eggs and toast, I'd make enough for 3. If I felt like having oatmeal, I'd make a big pot. The kids seemed grateful, and I didn't mind helping out. This routine worked fine until last week. I woke up craving huevos rancheros. You know, fried eggs on tortillas with salsa and cheese. I was in a good mood, humming while I cooked, when the kids came downstairs rubbing their eyes. My nephew asked what the smell was, and I told him I was making huevos rancheros and offered them some. Both kids immediately made disgusted faces and said it looked gross. They complained that they didn't want that and asked me to make something else instead. I looked at these 2 little faces staring up at me expectantly. They'd been through enough upheaval already, and I didn't want to be another source of stress. I offered to make pancakes instead, and both kids got excited and said yes. So I put my breakfast aside and made them pancakes from scratch. They were happy, I felt good about helping, and I figured it was just a one-time thing. The next morning I decided on breakfast potatoes with scrambled eggs. Simple, kid-friendly food. But when I started plating it up, here we go again. My niece wrinkled her nose and said she didn't want potatoes. My nephew chimed in agreeing, and asked if I could make something different. I felt a little annoyed but pushed it down. These kids had been through a lot. I made them cereal and toast instead, while my perfectly good breakfast got cold. The third morning was the breaking point. I'd made French toast, literally one of the most kid-friendly breakfasts you can think of. But sure enough, my nephew announced that they didn't like French toast, and my niece asked if I could make waffles instead. That's when I realized I created little monsters. These kids now expected me to be their personal short-order cook every morning while their mother slept until the afternoon. I told them I was done making 2 different meals every morning. I explained that this was what I was having for breakfast, and if they didn't want it, they could go wake up their mom and ask her to cook for them. My nephew protested that she was sleeping. I told him that meant he'd have to wake her up then. Both kids trudged upstairs. I could hear them knocking on their mother's bedroom door, talking to her through it. After a few minutes, they came back down looking disappointed. My niece told me that their mom said she was too tired and to ask me instead. I told them that what I was making was what was available, and they could take it or leave it. They both sat there pouting while I ate my French toast. Eventually, they ate some cereal they poured themselves. I thought maybe this would be a wake-up call for my sister, but she still didn't come downstairs until after 1 p.m. The moment she walked into the kitchen, both kids ran to her. My nephew complained that I had refused to feed them that morning. My niece added that I had made gross food and wouldn't make them anything else. My sister whipped around to face me with this look of pure rage. I could tell she'd worked herself up while lying in bed, probably imagining the worst. She started yelling about how serious this was and that these were children who needed to eat at normal times, not whenever I felt like getting around to it. I tried to explain that I've been feeding them every morning for weeks while she slept until the afternoon. She cut me off and said that wasn't the point. She accused me of being cruel for refusing to feed kids just because they didn't like what I was making. She demanded to know what kind of person does that to children. She was really getting going now, her voice getting louder and more shrill. She went on about how I was supposed to be helping them, not making everything harder. She claimed that these kids had been through enough without me adding to their problems. She said she couldn't believe I'd be so selfish and cruel to children. I could feel my temper rising. I'd been bending over backward to help her and her kids for 2 months, and this is the thanks I get. Then she delivered what was clearly meant to be the final blow. She said that maybe this was all a mistake and maybe they should just leave if I couldn't handle having them there. That last comment was clearly meant to manipulate me into apologizing and backing down. But I was done being the doormat. I told her that I knew she was going through a rough time and that I knew she was depressed, but I said she needed to wake up and take care of her kids instead of expecting me to do it for her. The kitchen went completely silent. My sister's mouth actually fell open like she couldn't believe I'd said that. The kids looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension. My sister opened and closed her mouth a few times like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Finally, she just turned around and walked back upstairs without another word. That was 3 days ago. She's been giving me the silent treatment ever since, coming downstairs only when she absolutely has to and avoiding eye contact. The kids keep looking at me like they're waiting for me to apologize to their mom, but I'm not going to. Here's what really gets me. She's clearly expecting me to be the one to fix this. She thinks if she pouts long enough, I'll cave and say I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry. I said what needed to be said. This morning was actually kind of funny. I made myself scrambled eggs and toast like usual. The kids came down and just stared at the food for a minute. Then, without saying a word, they each took a plate and ate what I'd made. No complaints, no demands for something different. Apparently, they figured out pretty quickly that the free breakfast buffet was over. My sister finally came downstairs around noon and saw the kids had eaten. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but I just smiled and went back to my computer. The ball's in her court now. I've given her a roof over her head, helped with her kids, and asked for nothing in return. The least she can do is act like a parent instead of another dependent I have to take care of. If she doesn't like that arrangement, she knows where the door is. I'm 15, and I've been living in this neighborhood for about 4 years now. My dad got transferred here for work when I was in middle school, and honestly, It took me forever to make friends. This place is pretty quiet, mostly families with kids and some older folks who've lived here since the houses were built in the 80s. The thing about our street is that it's kinda weird. There is no real sidewalk on our side, just this narrow strip of grass between the road and people's driveways. Most of us kids who ride bikes just leave them on that grassy area when we're hanging out or going into someone's house. It's not like we're blocking traffic or anything. The street is wide enough that cars can easily get around. I ride my bike everywhere. It's this blue mountain bike that my parents got me last Christmas, and I saved up my allowance for months to buy better pedals and a new seat. That bike is basically my freedom since I can't drive yet. I use it to get to school, meet up with friends, go to the corner store, everything. There are about 6 of us kids on the block who hang out regularly. We're all between 13 and 16, and we spend most afternoons after school riding around the neighborhood or sitting on someone's porch playing games on our phones. Sometimes we'll leave our bikes on the grass strip while we go inside to grab drinks or use the bathroom. That's when Karen started her campaign against us. I don't know her real name, but that's what we started calling her after the first few encounters. She lives in this big house with the perfectly manicured lawn about halfway down our street. She's probably in her 40s, always wearing these expensive-looking workout clothes, and drives this massive white car that looks like it could climb mountains. The first time she said something was about 2 months ago. I was at my friend's house with a couple other kids, and we'd left our bikes on the grass strip like always. Karen pulled up in her car and rolled down her window. She yelled at us to move our bikes right away. I asked if we were in her way, trying to be polite about it. She said yes, we were cluttering up the public street with our junk, and it looked trashy. My friend came out of his house when he heard the raised voices. He asked what was going on, and Karen told him that we couldn't leave our bikes all over the place like this. She said it looked trashy and was probably illegal. My friend pointed out that we weren't hurting anyone and would be gone in about 20 minutes. Karen said she didn't care how long we'd be there and told us to move them immediately or she'd call the police. We moved our bikes that day because we didn't want any trouble. But it really bugged me because we weren't doing anything wrong. The grass strip isn't anyone's private property, and our bikes weren't blocking the road at all. Over the next few weeks, Karen started showing up whenever we were hanging out. She'd drive slowly past us, sometimes stopping to look at us and shake her head. A couple times she got out of her car to yell at us about the bikes. One afternoon she confronted us again, asking why we wouldn't listen after she'd told us multiple times about the bike situation. I explained that we weren't blocking anything and cars could get through fine. She said that wasn't the point, and that this neighborhood had standards. She claimed we were bringing down property values with our mess. One of my friends asked how bikes could affect property values, and Karen told him not to get smart with her. She said she'd lived there for 8 years and wasn't going to let a bunch of teenagers ruin her investment. She started threatening to call our parents, the police, even the homeowners association. Most of us tried to avoid her after that, but it was hard since she seemed to patrol the street looking for us. The breaking point came last Tuesday. It was a really nice day, so 5 of us decided to ride our bikes to the park about a mile away. When we got back, we were all hot and thirsty, so we left our bikes on the grass strip and went into my friend's house to get some water and cool off in the air conditioning. We were inside for maybe 15 minutes when we heard this loud crunching sound outside. We all ran to the window and saw Karen's white car driving slowly over our bikes. She had pulled her car onto the grass strip and was deliberately running over each bike one by one. My friend gasped that she was crushing our bikes and asked if she was insane. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the window. Karen got out of her car and looked at the mangled mess of bikes underneath her car. She didn't look upset or sorry, she looked satisfied. I asked my friend if he was recording this too, and he said he got it all on video. We ran outside, and Karen was standing there with her arms crossed. I asked her what she had done, telling her she just destroyed our bikes. Karen said she had warned us kids over and over again about leaving our junk there, and that actions have results. My friend yelled that she couldn't just run over our stuff because it was destruction of property. Karen told us to prove it and said maybe we shouldn't have left our bikes where they could get run over. Another friend said we literally saw her do it on purpose, but Karen claimed she was just trying to park and our bikes were in her way. She insisted it wasn't her fault we left them somewhere dangerous, but I had the whole thing recorded on my phone. You could clearly see her driving onto the grass strip and deliberately positioning her car over each bike. There was no way this could be called an accident. My friend called his dad at work, crying because his bike was completely destroyed. The frame was bent in half and both wheels were twisted beyond repair. My bike wasn't as bad, but the front wheel was warped and the handlebars were bent at a weird angle. When my friend's dad got home an hour later, he was furious. He looked at the video I'd taken and immediately called the police. Karen had gone back inside her house, probably thinking she'd gotten away with it. My friend's dad told us this was clearly intentional destruction of property. He said you could see in the video how she drove right up onto the grass to hit the bikes. The police officer who showed up was actually pretty cool. He watched the video and talked to all of us kids about what happened. He also went to talk to Karen. We couldn't hear exactly what was said, but we could see her getting more and more animated through her front window. After about 10 minutes, the officer came back over to us. The officer explained that he'd seen the video and heard our statements. He said this appeared to be intentional destruction of property and that he would file a report and follow up with charges. Karen came storming out of her house, yelling that this was ridiculous and that our bikes were abandoned on public property. The officer told her they'd already discussed this and that the video evidence was pretty clear about her intentions. Karen demanded to speak to his supervisor and claimed we kids had been terrorizing the neighborhood for months. The officer said she was welcome to contact the station, but that wouldn't change what happened that day. 2 days later, we heard that Karen had been arrested. Apparently, the district attorney decided to press charges for destruction of property and harassment. The total value of the damaged bikes was over $1,500, which made it a felony. Our parents all got together and decided to sue her in civil court too. My dad says we'll probably get enough money to buy even better bikes than the ones she destroyed. Karen's house has been really quiet lately. On that day, I had just finished a stressful morning dealing with a client who kept changing their mind about their logo design. By lunchtime, I was mentally exhausted and just wanted to grab a quick bite somewhere quiet. I decided to head to the local burger joint a few blocks from my office. It's usually not too crowded during the lunch rush and their cheeseburgers are decent when you need comfort food. I ordered my usual, a double cheeseburger with fries and a Coke, and found a corner table where I could eat in peace while scrolling through my phone. I was wearing my black dress pants and a gray turtleneck sweater that day. Nothing fancy, just standard business casual attire. The turtleneck was a Christmas gift from my sister last year, and it's become one of my go-to pieces when I want to look put together without much effort. I took my time eating, savoring the greasy goodness and letting the stress of the morning melt away. The restaurant was moderately busy with a typical lunch crowd, office workers, a few families, some teenagers on their lunch break from school. Everyone was minding their own business, which was exactly what I needed. After finishing my meal, I gathered up my trash on the plastic tray like any decent human being would do. The collecting station was just a few steps away from my table. This is basic restaurant etiquette that I learned as a kid. You clean up after yourself, especially in fast casual places like this. When I stood up with my tray, I noticed a woman sitting one table over from where I had been eating. She was probably in her 40s, dressed in a business suit and had been there when I arrived. She looked like she worked in an office nearby and was on her lunch break too. But then things got weird. The woman suddenly started waving at me enthusiastically, holding up her own tray with both hands like she was flagging down a taxi. She called out to me loudly, saying something about how I could take her tray too, since I was obviously working there. She was shouting across the small distance between our tables. Other customers started looking over to see what the commotion was about. I was confused and looked around to see if she was talking to someone behind me, but there was no one there. I told her that I didn't work at the restaurant. Her face went from expectant to confused in about 2 seconds. She lowered her tray but kept staring at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. She pointed toward the collecting station, and explained that she had seen me getting ready to take my tray over there, so she assumed I was clearing tables as part of my job. She was still holding her tray up in the air, expecting me to come over and take it from her. The realization hit me like a brick wall. This woman thought I was an employee. I explained to her that I was taking my own tray to return it because that's what customers do when they're finished eating. You could see the gears turning in her head when she processed this information. But instead of being embarrassed about her mistake, she seemed almost indignant. She told me that she didn't know how she was supposed to figure out that I wasn't an employee. According to her, I was dressed like I worked there and I was clearing a table, so it was a reasonable assumption. This is where my patience ran out. I had already been having a stressful day, and this woman's attitude was the last straw. I asked her sarcastically when fast food employees ever wore turtleneck sweaters to work. I gestured down at my outfit, which clearly looked nothing like the uniform the actual employees were wearing. They had branded polo shirts and baseball caps with the restaurant logo. I was wearing business casual clothing that cost more than most people spend on a week's worth of meals. She started to say something about what she had thought, but I cut her off. I told her that she probably assumed every customer who had basic manners and cleaned up after themselves must be an employee. I said that this said a lot more about what kind of customer she usually was than anything else. The words came out more harshly than I had intended, but I was annoyed by her assumption. What kind of person expects other customers to bust their tables for them? She started sputtering something about how rude I was being. A few other customers were now openly staring at our exchange. I could see one of the actual employees behind the counter watching the situation unfold, probably wondering if they needed to intervene. I told her that the tray return was right over there and that she could walk her own tray over just like everyone else does. I turned and walked to the collecting station with my own tray, making a point of showing her exactly how easy it was. When I turned back around, she was still sitting at her table, looking like she couldn't believe what had just happened. But here's where it gets even better. When I was walking toward the exit, I heard her call out to one of the actual employees. She complained loudly that I had been very rude to her. The teenage employee looked confused and asked what had happened. She explained that I had refused to take her tray when she asked me to. The employee told her politely that I was a customer and didn't work there. The employee's tone was polite, but you could tell they were trying not to laugh. The woman went from red to purple when she realized how ridiculous she sounded complaining to an employee about another customer not providing her with service. I paused by the door to watch this unfold, and I wasn't the only one. Several other customers had also stopped what they were doing to witness this spectacle. The woman finally seemed to understand that she had made herself look foolish in front of an entire restaurant. The kid pointed to the exact same spot I had just used and told her that the tray return station was right over there if she was finished with her meal. They maintained their professional demeanor despite what had to be one of the stranger interactions of their workday. In all my years of eating at various establishments, I had never encountered someone who expected other customers to clear their table for them. The sheer entitlement was mind-boggling. Later that evening, I told my roommate about the incident over dinner. He laughed so hard he nearly choked on his food. He said he couldn't believe that she thought I was an employee just because I was being a considerate customer. I told him that apparently basic human decency was so rare that she assumed anyone displaying it must be getting paid for it. I'm 14 and tall for my age, like really tall. When I was 12, I was already 5 feet 6 inches, and now I'm pushing 5 feet 8 inches. My mom says I get it from my dad's side of the family, but honestly, it's been more of a curse than a blessing. People always assume I'm older than I am, which leads to some pretty awkward situations. The worst part is how I carry myself. I'm not one of those confident tall girls you see in movies. I'm awkward and gangly, and I tend to slouch to try to blend in. My mom's always telling me to stand up straight, but when you're a head taller than most of your classmates, standing up straight just makes you stick out more. Anyway, a couple years ago, when I was 14, my family decided to go to the traveling fair that comes to our town every summer. It's nothing fancy, just your typical small-town carnival with rides that look like they've seen better days and food trucks selling overpriced junk food. But my little brother and sister love it, so we make it a tradition. My brother was 8 at the time and my sister was 6. They're both pretty small for their ages, unlike me, so they still fit perfectly on all the kiddie rides. Usually I just watch them from the sidelines, but that day, they really wanted me to ride the mini roller coaster with them. It's one of those tiny coasters designed for little kids with dragon-shaped cars and everything. I felt ridiculous even walking up to it, but my siblings were so excited that I couldn't say no. The line was pretty short, just a few families with young kids. I was clearly the oldest person waiting, but I figured the ride operator would just assume I was there to supervise or something. When we got to the front of the line, I helped my brother and sister into one of the dragon cars, then moved to get into the car behind them. That's when the ride operator, this guy who looked like he was maybe in his 20s, started saying something under his breath. I couldn't really hear what he was saying at first, so I stopped and looked at him. He was staring at me with this weird expression on his face. I asked him to repeat what he said because I couldn't hear him over the noise of the fair. He asked if I was the parent of the 2 kids. I was confused for a second because I know I'm tall, but I definitely don't look old enough to have kids. I told him no, those were my siblings, and I was just riding with them. He shook his head and said something else, but I still couldn't make it out over the noise of the fair. I asked him what he said again. That's when he said it clearly, loud enough for everyone in line to hear. He asked me if I was pregnant. The question hit me like a slap in the face. I just stood there for a few seconds, completely stunned. I could feel my face turning red and my hands starting to shake. Everyone in line was staring at me now. I told him I was 14 and that wasn't an appropriate question to ask. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. I was trying so hard not to cry or make a scene. The ride operator looked embarrassed for maybe 3 seconds. Then he just scoffed and turned to help the next family in line. I was mortified. I wanted to disappear into the ground. My brother and sister were looking at me with confused expressions, not really understanding what had just happened. I helped them out of the dragon car and we walked away from the ride. I was trying to act like it didn't bother me, but I was really upset. I mean, what kind of person asks a kid that question? And in front of everyone. I kept telling myself to just let it go, that making a big deal about it would only make things worse. But my brother, even though he's only 8, he's pretty smart. He could tell something was wrong. He asked me what that man had said to me. I tried to brush it off, telling him it was nothing important and not to worry about it, but he kept pressing, saying I looked sad. I tried to brush it off, but my brother wasn't having it. When we met back up with our parents at the food court, he immediately went up to our mom. He told her that the man at the dragon coaster had been mean to me, that he had asked me a bad question and made me sad. My mom looked at me with concern and asked what had happened. I really didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but my brother was determined to tell the whole story. Eventually, I explained what the ride operator had said to me. I've never seen my mom so angry. Her face went completely red and she stood up from the picnic table so fast that she knocked over her drink. She asked me to repeat exactly what he had said, her voice getting louder with each word. I tried to tell her it was okay and that we should just forget about it. But she said absolutely not, that what he said was completely inappropriate. She demanded to know where the ride was. She walked straight over to the dragon coaster with me trailing behind her, trying to convince her to let it go. But when my mom gets angry, there's no stopping her. She walked right up to the ride operator who was helping another family onto the ride. She asked him if he was the one who had asked her 14-year-old daughter if she was pregnant. The ride operator's face went pale. He looked around nervously, probably hoping his supervisor wasn't within earshot. He told her he was just doing his job and following safety protocols. My mom asked him what kind of safety protocols involved asking children inappropriate personal questions. She said she didn't think so. By now, other parents in line were starting to stare and whisper. The ride operator was clearly getting flustered. He said he thought I might be too big for the ride and he was just checking. My mom asked him if he was seriously saying he was checking if a child was pregnant in front of other customers without any attempt at being discreet. The guy didn't have an answer for that. My mom wasn't done. She asked where his manager was. She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed my hand and walked straight to the main office near the entrance of the fair. There was a line of people with various complaints, but my mom walked right to the front. She told the woman at the desk that she needed to speak to whoever was in charge right now. The woman at the desk tried to tell her she had to wait in line, but my mom explained the situation and suddenly the manager appeared. The manager said he understood we had a concern about one of the ride operators. My mom told the whole story again, and I could see the manager's expression getting more and more serious as she talked. The manager said he was so sorry this had happened and that this was absolutely not acceptable behavior from their staff. My mom said she should hope not, explaining that I was clearly a child and the employee's question had been completely inappropriate. The manager offered us free admission for our whole family plus tickets to come back another time. But my mom wasn't satisfied. She said that was a nice gesture, but she thought the employee needed to understand how serious this was. She explained that I had been humiliated in front of other customers. The manager agreed and said he would handle it immediately. The manager walked us back over to the Dragon Coaster where the ride operator was still working. I was hoping we could just take our free tickets and leave, but my mom had other ideas. The manager told the ride operator that he needed to apologize to me and my mother immediately. The ride operator looked around nervously. There were other customers waiting in line and a few of his co-workers had gathered to see what was happening. He said he was sorry if he had offended anyone and that he was just trying to follow safety guidelines. My mom told him that wasn't an apology and to try again. The manager nodded in agreement, saying that a proper apology would be appropriate. The ride operator looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but there. He apologized for asking me that question, admitting it was inappropriate and that he shouldn't have said it. I thanked him quietly. Part of me felt bad for the guy because he looked so humiliated, but another part of me thought he deserved it. He had embarrassed me in front of everyone, so maybe he needed to know how that felt. The manager handed us our free tickets and we headed to the food court. My mom bought us cotton candy and mini donuts, and we spent the rest of the evening enjoying the fair. My brother and sister rode a bunch of other rides, and I actually had a pretty good time once I stopped thinking about what had happened. We never did go back to use those free tickets though. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.